Welcome to Covenant Communications Audio Library. We are pleased to present Trial, Blessing, or Both by Hank Smith. We hope you enjoy the presentation.
Hi! Thank you for coming! Oh, you probably thought there was a better speaker. I am sorry. I will try to do a good job, but I did get called wonderful in the prayer. I hope you heard that. That's never happened to me before. That was fantastic. That made me feel good. All right. Here is what we're going to do today. Take a look at our topic. Our topic today is something I've been thinking about for a while. Trial, blessing, or both. Trial, blessing, or both. Here's what it comes from. I talk to people all over the place who go through difficult things. So do you. And a lot of the times, what do you hear? You hear, yes, it was just a horrible thing. I would never want to go through it again. But you know, it's really been a blessing. It's really been a blessing. Or they'll say something like a blessing in disguise, right? So a blessing dresses up as a trial. Then comes into your life and goes, wow. And you're like, a blessing in disguise. The best example of this in the scriptures, I think, is Joseph of Egypt. Being sold by his brothers. Was that a trial or a blessing? Yeah, some of you say trial, some of you say blessing. It really is both. At the time, it's a trial, right? You would never, as he's being drug away by Egyptians, you wouldn't stop everybody and be like, you know, Joseph, this really is a blessing. You wouldn't do that, right? That would be a horrible thing to say to someone as they're being drug away into slavery, okay? He works his way up in Potiphar's house. You guys know this story, right? He works his way up in Potiphar's house. He becomes head slave. He becomes head slave. And then, do you remember the story? Potiphar's wife is like, hey, hey, hey. And, sorry, that's seduction. Hey, hey, hey. She's Fat Albert, apparently. Anyway, Joseph, do you remember he says, no, no, no. And he ends up going to prison because she said he attacked her, right? And so he goes to prison. Was that a trial or a blessing? It ends up being both, but at the time, what was it? Absolutely. A trial. You got to imagine if he's laying in his Egyptian bunk with his cellmate snoring, he's got to be like, God hates me. That's the only logical explanation for my life, right? And you wouldn't poke your head above his bunk and, you know, this really is a blessing. You wouldn't do that, right? But you know that it's going to end up being a blessing. Why? Because he works his way up to head prisoner. This guy's a go-getter. He works his way up to head prisoner, and it all changes one day when Pharaoh has a dream. He needs it interpreted. There's this guy in prison, head prisoner. I don't know what he does as head prisoner. Prison choir, cooking class. Anyway, Pharaoh's like, well, go get him. So they go get Joseph, and his whole life changes in one day. He goes from head prisoner to vice pharaoh, prime minister, whatever, of Egypt in one day. That is a huge promotion. Right? Can you imagine getting some guy out of the Utah State Pen, making you vice president? We get some guy out of the Utah State Pen, make him vice president. He'd be like, well, I was head prisoner. That's amazing. It's amazing. It all changes in one day. So Joseph finds out that his greatest trials really were his greatest blessings. Really were his greatest blessings. The story's good if it stops right there. It's a great story about a guy overcoming trials to, you know, just keep going. Just keep going. But then who shows back up? You guys know the story. You know, most people have seen the play. If they haven't read the book, it's his brothers. His brothers show back up. These are the guys who sold him a couple decades ago. Can you imagine when he's sitting there? He's fully Egyptian. He married an Egyptian. He's got kids, right? And then all of a sudden, Reuben is there. It'd be like going to a 30-year high school class reunion. You're like, whoa, he's put on weight. Right? You look so different. You sound the same, right? And do you think one of them, do you think Simeon or Naphtali went over to Levi? He's like, Levi, hey, look at that Egyptian up there. You know what that looks like? Don't say it. Right? Because do you remember what they've said? They've said that they've heard the cries of Joseph in their ears. They've heard his cries. What does that mean? Their decision has what? Has haunted them. Anybody ever have a decision haunt them? Sometimes we think that people hurt us or hurt our family and they're just fine, like they're happy. Usually people's decisions haunt them for a long time. So Joseph decides to test them. Do you remember what he does? What does he do? He decides to test them by framing which one? His brother, Benjamin, his littlest brother. He's going to frame Benjamin. So he puts the cup inside the sack, right? And he's like, you've stolen from me. No, I haven't. Yes, you have. And look at inside your sack. And he wants to see if the brothers will leave. He says, you, Benjamin, you have to stay here. The rest of you can go home. He wants to see, will they do what? Will they leave him behind like they left him behind? And they won't do it. They won't do it. In fact, one of them, which is the one who says, take me instead? Judah says, take me instead. I cannot go back to my father without him. It'll break my father's heart. Take me instead. By the way, Judah's great, you get the picture, grandson is Jesus, who basically says the same thing about us. How can I go back to our heavenly Father without him, without her? Take me instead. So a little foreshadowing from his great, you get the picture, grandfather. Joseph realizes they've changed, so he sends all the Egyptians out of the room. Can you imagine this? Okay. You got the brothers there, you got this Egyptian. He's been speaking through an interpreter this entire time, right? And all of a sudden he sends them all out of the room. You got to be thinking, what's the Egyptian guy doing? Right? And all of a sudden he starts stripping off the Egyptian garb. What's he say? I am. He speaks Hebrew. I says, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold. Let's just talk about it right now. Whom ye sold. Look at the picture. See the guy on the left who's like, shut the front tent flap. Are you kidding? That is a shocking moment. You've got to be like, you're alive. And then you've got to think, you're alive. You know how your brother, like you're in a water fight and your brother gets the hose and you're like, we're friends. And he's like, no, we're not. What could he do? What could he do? He could be like, let's see how you like slavery. Let's rip you away from your family. Let's see how you like prison. Let's see how you like fat Albert. Hey. Let's see how you like it all. But he doesn't. Do you know what he says? He says, it's okay. I forgive you, but I don't want you to be angry with yourselves. I got to admit, when I forgive someone, you guys, I'll say to them something like, I forgive you. You shouldn't forgive you. You should keep yourself up at night. This decision should haunt you, like we've talked about, right? But Joseph says, don't be angry with yourselves. Really? Who is this guy? Who is someone who could be like, come on, who hasn't sold a family member? We've all made mistakes. You ruined my life. It's fine. It's fine. No. It's because he realizes something. He says, you didn't send me here. Who did? God sent me here to preserve your life. In his greatest trials, he saw not only his own blessings, but blessings for his family. That's an incredible story. Trials, blessing, or both. Let's do it again. Trial, blessing, or both. We've got to start thinking. Now, you're going to go through some difficult things, and I like clarifying the types of trials you're going to go through in life. I know some of you are thinking, Brother Smith, my life's good right now. I have no trials. Oh, good for you. Just wait. Really, really heart-wrenching, soul-ripping times are coming. A message from the Church of Jesus Christ. But who here has already figured out you're not going to get through life trial-free? Who's already? Show me your hands if you've already figured it out. You're not going to get through life trial-free. It happens to everybody. Elder Maxwell. Do you know the name Neil A. Maxwell? You know it's a general authority because of the initial, huh? You're like, initial general authority. Neil A. Maxwell was a member of the 12, probably around the time you were born, maybe just a little bit after you were born. He passed away. He said that there are 3 types of trials. I like this. He said there's type 1 trials. He said some things happen to us because of our own sins. Who's ever done this before? Who's ever made their own life hard? Raise your hand if you've ever made your own life hard. If you're sitting next to your parents, they're probably grabbing your hand and putting it up. Right? You make your own life difficult. Let me show you some of these. We do. Do you ever think the Lord looks at your life and says, I was going to give you trials, but you do a pretty great job of making your own. So I'm going to go ahead and be hands off here. Look at that girl. See, that's a bad mistake. By the way, if you're sitting next to a teenage girl that has the tendency to kiss things she shouldn't, go ahead and tell her. Your life would be better if you'd stop kissing things you shouldn't. Go ahead and tell her. Go ahead. Unless you're the thing she kisses, then don't say anything. All right. You ever made a bad decision with one of your friends? You're like, we made our own life hard. Anybody sitting by someone they make bad decisions with? Let me see them. See? Just like when you two get together, the IQ goes down. How does that happen? Have you ever helped a friend make a bad choice? We make dumb decisions. In fact, I want to tell you a story. Now, I'm going to show you a pulley so you can visualize what this story is about, okay? In case you've never seen a pulley before. All right, here's the story. Now, you really have to envision this or you're not going to find it as funny as I want you to. Okay. It appears an English company owned a property in the West Indies. A violent storm damaged one of their buildings, and a man was sent to make repairs. Of his experience, he wrote the manager as follows. Respected sir, when I got to the building, I found that the hurricane had knocked some of the bricks off the top. So I rigged up a beam with a pulley at the top of the building and hoisted up, so you can see him pulling, hoisted up a couple of barrels of bricks. When I'd fixed the buildings, there were a lot of bricks left over. So I hoisted the barrel back up again, secured the line at the bottom. So he tied it at the bottom, so the barrel's hanging there. All right, he says, I then went up and filled the barrel with the extra bricks. Then I went to the bottom and untied the line. Unfortunately, the barrel of bricks was heavier than I was. And before I knew what was happening, the barrel started down, jerking me off the ground. I decided to hang on. Halfway up, I met the barrel coming down and received a severe blow on my shoulder. I then continued to the top, banging my head against the beam and getting my finger jammed in the pulley. Oh. When the barrel hit the ground, it bursted its bottom, allowing all the bricks to spill out. I was now heavier than the barrel, and so started down again at high speed. Halfway down, I met the barrel coming up and received severe injuries to my shins. When I hit the ground, I landed on the bricks, getting several painful cuts on the sharp edges. At this point, I must have lost my presence of mind. I let go of the rope. The barrel came down, giving me another heavy blow on the head and putting me in the hospital. I respectfully request sick leave. All right. So do you understand? What's type 1 trials? Those are the trials we cause ourselves. Turn to the person next to you and say, avoid type 1 trials. Go ahead and tell them. Avoid type 1 trials. Avoid type 1 trials. Now, there's something to be said about this, and I think it's an important thing for you to realize. The Strength of Youth pamphlet is basically a guide to avoiding type 1 trials, right? Hopefully you can see that the commandments that we get are God's way of saying, I would hope you'd steer clear of these problems. Sometimes we just say, no, full speed ahead, all right? I'm going to learn this lesson the hard way. Listen to Mosiah 2. Moreover, I would desire that you should consider the blessed and happy state of those that keep the commandments of God. What's he saying? Consider the blessed and happy state of those that keep the commandments of God. Meaning, look how they don't run into as many problems as those who sin. Sin is going to cause you problems. Turn to the person next to you and say it. Sin is going to cause you problems. Trials, difficulties. Now, going back, type 1 trials also involve other people's mistakes and sins. Who here has ever been hurt by someone else's choices? Raise your hand if you've ever been hurt by someone else's choices. Look at them if they're here. Be like, you. All right. We get hurt by other people's mistakes and choices. My family knows all about that. Right now, we're going through a really big difficulty from somebody's choice, right? Who's ever been hurt by someone who's supposed to love them? Who's promised to love them? These things hurt. And they tear your heart out because here's someone who's supposed to love you, but then turns around and makes choices that are the exact opposite. All right, let's talk then about type 2 trials. Type 2 trials are trials and tribulations that come as part of living on this planet. Who's ever gotten sick? Who's ever gotten sick? Who's ever hit the ground from tripping, right? And you're like, gravity's so fun. Do you guys think that the Lord tried to tell us about this? Do you wonder if we were listening when he explained earth life to us? And we're like, that sounds so fun, right? And he said, no, it's fun, yeah. But do you think we paid much attention? My friend, Meg Johnson, I've spoken about her before if you've ever heard me speak. And Meg was 22 years old, I think, when she fell off a cliff. She was headed to be a professional dancer, salsa dancer. And she fell off a cliff and became a quadriplegic. She lost the use of her arms and legs. And she said that after losing that ability and having to relearn all the basics of life again, right? How to learn how to live as a quadriplegic. She said one night she had a dream. And in her dream, she was in the premortal world, and she was watching herself in the premortal world. Here's this spirit that can walk and talk and move and dance. And an angel was explaining to her premortal spirit what it was going to be like to be paralyzed. And she said, my little spirit sat there like, okay, paralyzed. Okay, that sounds interesting. And she said, myself in the dream looked at her and went, you dumb little naive spirit, right? I just wonder, did we know what we were getting signed up for? I wonder also, and this is just Brother Smith thinking out loud here, I'm not the doctrine of the church, okay? I wonder how many of those that followed the adversary were just too scared of the difficulties that would come, the trials that would come. Because it would be scary if you think about it. If someone explained to you this mortal life, you're going to go, it's going to be hard, you're going to get sick, people are going to die. Well, am I going to know where they go? To a degree. Well, am I going to remember this before? No, not at all. Right? I wonder if that's like, that sounds too hard. Yet here you are. You signed up. And don't forget that, by the way. Whenever we go through hard times, do you ever think to yourself, you think the Lord looks at us and goes, hey, wait. Don't get mad at me. You signed up for this. It's like signing up for a class and then getting mad at the teacher when the test is hard. And he's like, no, let's bring up the form. God probably had us sign a form. I am doing this by my own free will and choice, and I will not get mad at you. He's like, see, look, you signed the form. It's just, who's learned that? Life is hard. Life is hard. And it's kind of meant to be, I think. It's kind of the classroom with built-in problems. In fact, I'll have students come to me at BYU and they'll say, Brother Smith, I'm having problems. I must be doing something wrong. And that's not always the case. It's not always the case that you're doing something wrong. Look at the brother of Jared. The brother of Jared built the boats exactly the way the Lord told him to, and they have serious design flaws. Right? Anybody know this story? Ether chapter 2? Do the boats have problems? The brother of Jared's like, I did it exactly the way you told me to, and there's some issues. And the Lord says, well, what are the issues? We can't see, we can't steer, and we can't breathe. Can you imagine telling the Lord that his boat design is flawed? Right? You're like, there's got serious problems. So either one of two things happens, you guys. Either the Lord does not know how to build boats, or two, he wanted him to what? Run into problems. So please don't think that whenever you run into difficulties or problems, it's because you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's because you're doing things right that you run into problems. That's going to happen. All right. The ones I wanted to talk about are really type 2 and type 3. Type 3 trials. Look what Elder Maxwell says. He said, these type 3 trials come to us because an omniscient Lord deliberately chooses to school us. Now, type 1, type 2, type 3 trials. I think it's an okay thing to do as you're going through some difficulty to say, is this a type 1, a type 2, or type 3 trial? I don't know if it's going to be clear-cut, you know for sure, especially between 2 and 3, right? Some things are just built into this life, and some things are coming because the Lord wants to teach you. But I think it's wise to try to figure this out, especially try to limit which one. Some of you are like, all of them, of course. No, we want to limit which one? Type 1. Type 1. Anybody getting there? Anybody in their 80s who's like, I finally stopped making dumb mistakes? Who's made dumb mistakes before? Who's ever just made dumb mistakes? You should have known better. Those are type 1 trials. So let's talk about what the Lord can do with us through our trials. This is Alma 62. This is Mormon. He's talking about the end of the war chapters. Do you know where the war chapters are in the Book of Mormon? Alma 43 through 63. This is the very end. And here's Mormon speaking about the war. He says, but behold. That's my Mormon voice. Mormon the guy, not Mormon the people, because I can't say that anymore. All right. But behold. Because of the exceedingly great length of the book of Alma, just kidding, because of the exceedingly great length of the war between the Nephites and the Lamanites, many had become hardened because of the exceedingly great length of the war. Many were softened because of their afflictions, insomuch they did humble themselves before God, even in the depth of humility. Alma 62:41. Turn to the person next to you and say, you're a scriptural genius. What does that mean? Go ahead, ask them. Say, you're a scriptural genius. What does that mean? Give a 20-second answer to the person sitting you next to. Why is Mormon writing this verse? I think if we had time, we'd bring you up here, and most of you would say something like this. You'd say, Brother Smith, Alma 62:41 is basically saying when you go through something really difficult, you have a choice. You have a choice. You can either let it harden you. Who's ever done this? Who's ever been hardened, angry human? Who's ever been it before? Hardened, angry human. Why did it happen? Most often, when I ask people this question, why did you become a hardened, angry teenager? Why did you become a hardened, angry adult? Mostly because life got so painful, it got easier to just not feel anymore. Who's ever done this? Fine, life, you want to hurt me? Watch. I won't feel. I won't love, I won't care. Look at me. You're a joy to live with. I get it, though. I get it. Sometimes life gets so painfully hard that you're like, I'm done. Who's ever been done before? I'm done. I don't want to feel anymore. It hurts. I get that. But look what Mormon says is an alternative. He said, many were softened because of their afflictions. They chose it. They chose to be softened. So in the middle of great trial and great difficulty, what does softening look like? I think it looks something like, okay, God, what do you want me to learn? I'm here to be taught. I will keep praying. I'll keep reading. I'll keep going, even though this is painful. You know better than I do. That is an incredibly difficult choice, right? And you can't do it at the time. You can't show up in someone's life when they're going through a hardened trial and be like, well, that's really is a blessing. You can't do that. They have to know before, right? This is like an emergency food storage thing. You got to do this beforehand. You can't do it at the time of. I want to help you do that. I want to help you choose to be softened. Do you know who this is? It's not me. It's in black and white. Although if I look like him when I'm 70, I'll take it. He's a pretty handsome 70-year-old. Anybody know who it is? It's President Uchtdorf. Good job. This is Dieter F. Uchtdorf, but in this picture, he's 10. Did you know that Elder Uchtdorf had a bit of a different childhood than you and I? I don't know if you know this, but he grew up in Germany in the 1950s, 40s and 50s. I don't know if you know anything about world history, but Germany in the 1940s and 1950s is a pretty difficult place to be. In fact, he was a refugee not once, but twice. I've never been a refugee. Idaho has never attacked Utah with potato guns, right? I've never had to run from my home because people were coming in tanks. That's never happened, but Elder Uchtdorf literally had to hold his mother's hand as they ran away from Soviet soldiers. This is just such a mind-blowing thing to grow up this way. He had to do it twice. The second time, he had to change languages. He was in a place that was predominantly Russian. They spoke Russian. And then when they fled to the other side of Germany, now they spoke English. He said, my tongue was not made to speak English. So not only do you leave your friends, your home, everything behind, but now it's a completely new language. Can you imagine being 10 years old and having this happen to you? He said, my parents couldn't get work, right? They didn't speak the language. He said he remembers their one-bedroom place that they found for their whole family to live in. He said he remembers laying on his little cot, counting the rats at night. Some of you do that? You do that? It'd be a hard way to grow up. He said because they had no money and no work, they had to start a laundry delivery service. So basically what they do is the kids would come pick up dirty laundry at someone's house. They'd bring it home. Mom and dad would clean it and then send it back. This was just so they could eat. Guess what Dieter's job was? Picking up and delivering the laundry. He said he'd always dreamed of owning a nice brand new bicycle. What he got was a heavy workhorse of a bicycle with a heavy cart behind it. He said it was miserable. He never says he hated it. I think the word hate you can't use in general conference. He just said, I was never overly enthused about my job or the bike. Which means what? He hated it. You guys use that with your parents, right? I'm not overly enthused about this chore. So he said his town had lots of hills. Anybody done bike riding on lots of hills? Up and down hills. You know those times when you're going up a hill and you can barely get the pedals around? He said that was his life all day. He said at times, I thought my lungs would burst. Right? And this wasn't weeks or months. This was years of riding this bike through his town, delivering laundry just so they can have enough food to eat. He said there was one redeeming quality about his job, and that is he could occasionally ride where? Where of all places do you think little boy Dieter Uchtdorf would want to ride over to? The airport. He would go over to the airport and he would watch the airplanes land. And he thought, maybe one day. Maybe one day. So when they decide to rebuild the German Air Force, guess who signs up? 17-year-old Dieter F. Uchtdorf. There he is. I know some of the girls are like, I can't think that. 17-year-old Dieter F. Now, here's the thing. In order to get into the Air Force, you have to pass a pretty strict physical exam. They ask him, they say, you passed your exams, but there's a problem. What is it? There's scar tissue all over your lungs. You had a lung disease and you were treated for it. What treatment did you receive? He says, I never had a lung disease. They said, no. You absolutely, there's no question you had a lung disease. But what treatment did you receive? He's like, I never had a lung disease. Can you imagine asking your parents, did I have a lung disease? Right? And they're like, well, we didn't want to ruin your day. You were having so much fun counting the rats, right? No, you guys, they find out later that this boy had a lung disease that could have killed him had he not received treatment. What was the treatment? It was the bike. He said, I realized later that that bike, which he did not like, was actually saving him from a lung disease he didn't know he had. Now, how would 11-year-old Dieter F. Uchtdorf feel about that bike? He'd say, I hate it. Take it to Mordor and throw it in, right? But if you're 70-year-old Dieter F. Uchtdorf, how do you feel about that bike? He says, without that bike, I never get into the Air Force. Without that, I never become a pilot. If I never become a pilot, I never become a general authority. I never become a counselor in the first presidency. All because of a bike. Now, here's my question. I know you're going through difficult things, and I know you're pretending not to. Some of you are like, oh, he's on to me. Yes. I sometimes say that Mormons get together twice a week to lie to each other about how they're doing. Because you guys, we get together and we say things, how are you? And what do we say back? Fine. And then we ask, how are things with you? And they say, so good, can't complain. Everybody's lying. And I get it. You don't want to, I get it. When your loyal leader is like, how are you? And you're like, my anxiety's off the charts. You want to talk about it? I get it. So what do you say instead? You just say, fine. You just say fine. I remember President Eyring saying once, if you treat everybody as if they're going through the hardest time of their life, 2/3 of the time you'll be right. Did you know that 1/3 of the teenagers in this country have some form of depression? 1/3. And many of them are in this room, although they've been taught how to pretend. I'm fine. Here's my question. This thing that you're going through, and we could list them all if you want, the most difficult thing teenagers can go through, right? Depression, anxiety, family problems, parents having problems, medical problems. Anybody have a medical problem they keep to themselves, right? Except for that one girl who raised her hand. She's like, I have massive medical problem, and I want the world to know. You guys, anybody go through school problems? Friend problems? Opposite sex problems? Anybody have any of those sometimes? There's just so many difficulties and problems you're going through, and yet you smile and say you are fine. And that's okay. Let me ask you this, though. What if this thing that you're going through that you don't tell anybody about, or very few people about, what if this thing is your bike? What if it's one thing you look back on and say, that's one of the most important things that's ever happened to me? I know some of you are going, okay, I'm going to like this one day. And again, I don't want to be one of those people that shows up in your life and it's like, this really is a blessing. But all I'm saying is, if you soften up a little bit, you might see that this is often how God works. Now, I have a place in my heart for those of you with depression and anxiety. People just don't understand. They just don't understand. I've talked to finally enough teenagers over the years that I think I'm starting to grasp what this really is. Think of mom and dad, those of you who've never struggled with this. Think of a moment in your life where you just don't know if you could get out of bed. That's what it feels like to have depression, but you don't feel it for a day or 2 or 3 days. You feel it every day. Every day. Imagine your anxiety when you're about to get news. Could be good news, could be bad news. And that feeling of trepidation of, what's this going to be like? What's my future going to be like? Imagine having that all day. And now you realize anxiety. So those of you who are struggling with that, I want to share a verse that I hope helps. Joseph Smith says in the first vision, he knelt down to pray, and look at about 2/3 of the way down on the first verse. Thick darkness gathered around me, and it seemed to me for a time as if I was doomed to sudden destruction. That's what I think anxiety and depression feel like. They feel like thick darkness gathering around you, and it seems that you are doomed. But those of you who are struggling with this, will you please mark 3 words in here? It seemed to me for a time that I was doomed to sudden destruction. I promise this thing that you're going through is only for a time. And I don't know why it's lasting so long. I wish there was a verse that I could give you and it took it away. I wish that I just say, hey, read this, and it's gone. But unfortunately, that's not the case. But please, if you need to, write those 3 words down and put them on your mirror, put them in your locker, put them somewhere you can see them. This is what? For a time. This is only for a time. And you have to do what Joseph did, exerting all my powers to call upon God to deliver me out of the power of this enemy. I will exert all my power to keep going, and then the light will come. The light will come. This idea of for a time reminded me of my favorite phrase in the Book of Mormon, and it came to pass. You want to know why? Because it never says, and it came to stay. It always passes. Everything that you're going through, the difficulties that you're going through, I promise you, they will pass. They will pass. Middle school will pass. Middle school will pass. Honestly, it's just a bad idea. I don't know whose idea this was. Let's take the most insecure people in society and put them in the same building together for 8 hours a day. Let's see who lives. It's like an emotional Hunger Games. It's just a bad idea. It's a Hunger Games for your self-esteem. Call it junior high, right? When it comes to junior high, I say it will pass. It may pass like a kidney stone, but it will pass. Now, I promise you it will pass. Let me show you what President Uchtdorf said. He says it a lot better than I do. He says, often, I call these the 3 offens. Often the deep valleys of our present will be understood only by looking back on them from the mountains of our future experience. Often we can't see the Lord's hand in our lives until long after the trials have passed. So what he's saying here is if you're going through something difficult and you're kind of asking God why, he's saying in the middle of it, you might not know why. You just have to what? Get through it. Just keep going, get through it. Then one day you'll be able to look back and see why. If you would have asked Joseph of Egypt, where's God's hand when he's in prison? What would he have said? Not in my life. But then he finds out later he was there the whole time. If you would ask President Uchtdorf when he was 11, where's God's hand in your life? What would he have said? Not here, not with this bike. But then he finds out later he was there the whole time. He was helping him the whole time. And the third often the most difficult times of our lives are essential building blocks that form the foundation of our character and pave the way to future opportunity, understanding. And anybody here lift weights? Who here lifts weights? Chorister dude, you lift weights, don't you? Yeah. You can tell he's up there like, that tricep was going at it with that 4-4. All right, so, hey, chorister guy, what's your name? McCoy. Ooh, even a tough name, too. McCoy. McCoy, the guy standing up behind our bench presser, what's his name? What's his job? He's the spotter. What's the spotter's job, McCoy? Make sure that you don't drop the weight on your face, right? Snap, crackle, and pop as your molars go flying all over. All right. He has other jobs, though. What will a good spotter do besides just make sure you don't drop the weight on your face? A good spotter will encourage you. They get pretty intense. McCoy, you get pretty intense when you're doing this. You can do this. You can do this. Right? Slapping you. You can do that. And there's going to be a point, I've talked to a couple of people like McCoy who lift weights a lot, and they say on a bench press like this, there's about 1.5 inches that's the hardest part of the lift, right when you get it to your chest. He said there's about 1.5 inches. And once you get past that, you can keep going. But it's that really hard time. And what will the spotter do at those really hard times? He'll give you just enough help. How much help? How much help will he or she give you? Just enough to what? To get you to where you can take it again. Right? And then I've seen this happen. Weightlifters will sit up and they'll be like, did you help me? Did you help me? What does the spotter always say? Oh, no, I'm a little bit. Little bit, right? Then he looks over at his friend. He's like, what? All right. I was watching this process, again, not participating. I was watching this process and I thought, you know what? God is an excellent spotter. You might not know it, but he is making sure you don't drop your life on your teeth. Many of you would have ruined your life a long time ago if he didn't come in many times. I bet you'll find out later. He was like, oh yeah, multiple times a day, especially when you were young. I was saving you. He'll encourage you, right? The scriptures are full of encouragement. Be of good courage. Like my peace I give unto you. There's all sorts of encouragement in the scriptures and come through the Spirit. And then during those really difficult times, what will he do? He'll help you, but help you how much? Just enough. Just enough to get you through the hardest time. And you'll probably get up to, I guarantee we'll get back to heaven and go, did you help me? Did you help me? He's like, nah, little bit. He looks at the angels. He's like, now, don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean, do you ever tell your spotter you're hurting? That you can do that. In fact, it reminded me of the story of a little boy who came down to Fast and Testimony meeting, grabbed the microphone. You ever seen one of those who are so scared and they're, you know, like Darth Vader's getting ready to bear his testimony. And they said this little boy went up there, and then he just went like this. Mom, I could use a little help down here. And I thought, what a perfect analogy. Sometimes it's okay to kneel down at your bedside and say, Heavenly Father, I could use a little help down here. That's okay. It's okay to do that. But you have to realize that this is the way God works. This quote right here from Elder Richard G. Scott might be the most important thing you hear in a month, especially those of you who are struggling. So listen closely. He says, quote, we are like infants in our understanding of eternal matters and their impact on us here in mortality. How much does an infant know? Walk up to an infant and be like, teach me about life. What will they say? That's how Elder Scott sees us when it comes to understanding life. If all matters were immediately resolved at your first petition, you could not grow. If every time you said, God, take this, he said, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll take it. Right? What if you had a spotter like that and you said, this is hard, take it, and they took it? Would you really want that spotter? Maybe in the moment you would, but in the long run, you wouldn't, because the whole point of going to the gym was what? To get stronger, not to have someone fix it for you. Now, this paragraph is crucial. I'm going to read it slowly so you can really take in every word. Your Father in heaven and his beloved Son love you perfectly. They would not require you to experience a moment more of difficulty than is absolutely needed for your personal benefit or for that of those you love. Do you see how crucial it is to understand that? Your Heavenly Father would never have you go through anything that wasn't for your good eventually. Now, I'm not saying they cause it. I'm not saying that they want it to happen. But they would not have you go through it if it were not eventually some future date for your benefit. And it might not even be in this life. I'm going to show you, I thought about that a little bit later. But you realize you can't walk up to someone and say that, right? You can't, as someone's child passes away or someone's mother or father passes away, you can't walk up to them and say, you know, this really is a blessing. You can't. They have to know that for themselves. They have to know that this is how God works. And if you don't know it, what will happen? Those of you who are like, my life's good, I love Heavenly Father, and you don't understand that he uses difficulty sometimes to shape us and to help us become what we need to become. If you don't understand that, what's going to happen? The moment something hard happens, you're going to get angry. Look, it happened to Laman and Lemuel. Look at they did murmur. Murmur is not just complain. Murmur has to do with anger. They did murmur. They got angry because they knew not the dealings of that God who created them. That's 1 Nephi 2:12. They knew not the dealings of that God who created them. Let me just show you one more on this, and then I just want to show you an example. Do you know who these two guys are? These are the Wright brothers. You are correct. Now, let's see never mind. Okay. Do you know their names? Orville and Wilbur Wright. Orville and Wilbur Wright changed the world. What did they invent? Airplanes. They invented the airplane. You guys, they changed the world. Just last week, I flew to Seattle to speak at a girls' camp and back. I was not even gone 24 hours from my house. Right? Can you imagine telling Brigham Young, I'm going to fly to Nauvoo and back in one day? He'd be like, witchcraft. Right? These guys changed the world. They absolutely changed the world. But did you know it almost didn't happen? When Wilbur Wright, the one on the right, he's the right of the right. When Wilbur Wright was 16 years old, he was supposed to go to an Ivy League school. He was going to be a scholar. I think it was Yale. He was going to go to Yale. And then there's a hockey accident. A hockey stick comes flying across the ice, hits him in the face, broke 3 bones in his cheek, and popped his eye out. By the time he gets better, it's 14 months later, his spot in school is gone. Maybe he can reapply. His mother gets tuberculosis. He cares for her for 3.5 years, and she dies. The opportunity to go to college is now gone. He basically says to his family, that was my chance. That was my chance. I guess I'll do what everybody else does. I'll open up a business. What does he open up? a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, his hometown. Right? Thinking, well, this is my life now. Guess who loves the bicycle shop, though? His brother. What's his name? Orville. Orv loves the bicycle. He's a tinkerer. Anybody have a sibling that likes to take things apart? Or a parent that just takes things apart? That's what Orville Wright is. He just takes even brand new toys. His mom would give him brand new toys. He'd take them apart to see how they worked. He would take two toys and try to make one toy out of the two. He just loved to take things apart and put them back together. So he loves working at the bicycle shop. Then he gets typhoid fever. Typhoid fever in the 1890s, pretty much a death sentence. It's the same typhoid fever that Joseph Smith got when the infection went to his leg. You guys heard that story. It's the same thing. He got typhoid fever, and he was in bed for 3.5 months. I know some of you are like, sweet. Well, what do you do when you're in bed for 3.5 months? Candy Crush. But Fortnite. That's not what he did. Apparently he didn't have a charger, and his phone died. So I don't know if you understand this. Most of you will, some of you won't. But there was these things back then called books. And you might have seen one at your grandma's house, but they're pages. Who's seen one? Who's seen a book before? Okay. Very primitive, kind of like a telephone landline. Crazy. So he read books. Guess what he read about? Not airplanes. There's no such thing. There's a German scientist by the name of Dieter Uchtdorf. Just kidding. There's a German scientist by the name of Otto Lilienthal who is writing on human flight. He's saying, look at the birds. Look at the birds. Look how they do this. Maybe we could someday do it, right? Maybe we could figure it out. So when Wilbur comes over to visit him with his typhoid fever, what's he say? Well, we could do this. And Wilbur says, Orv, do you realize the smartest people on the planet are working on this? Neither of us have gone to college. He says, no, with my skills and your brain and my handiwork, we could do this. We could figure it out. And guess what happens during the winter? Guess what happens to the bicycle shop during winter? Not a lot of business. This is perfect. Guess where they go? Where do they go? They need sand and wind. Where do they go? They go to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Why do they need wind? Airspeed. Why do they need sand? Crashing. All right, so. And for the first time in the history of the world, man flies. For the first time ever. Do you realize how big that, do you know, this has got to be one of the top 10 events in the history of the world, and there were 7 people there. The Wright brothers, 4 guys from Kitty Hawk who ran alongside the plane. And one guy, true story, one guy who just happened to be riding by on a bicycle, stops and sees it. He says, what are you guys doing? And one of these Kitty Hawk guys, I guess he's kind of a joker, he said, these guys are going to go up in this and catch ducks. And so he's like, okay, I want to watch. So he sits down and watches. This guy, whoever he is, nobody knows, watched one of the most important events in the history of mankind, and he left disappointed. You want to know why? They didn't catch a single duck. In fact, they didn't fly very far. A couple of weeks ago, I was in an airport with John By the Way. You guys know who John By the Way is, most of you. He's an airplane guru. You know, he's like, that's a Cessna 4119. That's a Boeing 821. I'm like, that's a big one. That's a small one. Anyway, we saw a 747, a real 747, you know, the big ones. And he said to me, he said, do you see that wingspan? He said, he pointed out the wingspan. He told me how long it was. The guy's weird. He pointed out this long wingspan, and then he said that wingspan of that airplane is longer than the Wright brothers' first flight. They changed the world. They changed the world. But here's the deal. It almost didn't happen if it weren't for what? A hockey stick flying across the ice and typhoid fever. Now, at the time, if you would have asked him about the hockey stick, what would he say? It was awful. It's miserable. It's tragic. Ruined my life, right? It would be hideous if you were out there in your snow coat on the ice like, you know, this really is a blessing. That would be an awful thing to do, but it ends up being what? It ends up being a great blessing. These guys weren't members of the church. They are now, but they weren't then. And I bet now they see the hand of God going through their life. What if you would have asked Orville about the typhoid fever? 3.5 months in bed. What would he say? Miserable, awful. This is the worst, right? And you wouldn't be there, you know, laying next to him in his bed. You know, this really is a blessing. You wouldn't do that, but it ends up being a blessing. Listen to this verse. Write this one down. Isaiah 55:9 says, for as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Now, if you really study that close, it's actually not very nice. If anybody else said it, we'd be quite insulted. If I said to McCoy, come stand next to me. Don't do it, McCoy, but I'm just saying. If I said, McCoy, come stand next to me. Okay, do you see the stars out there, McCoy? How far away are those? He's like, they're pretty far. It's pretty far. Good, McCoy. Do you see the distance between me, us here, and the stars? He's like, I sure do. Sure do. It's a long ways. Am I sounding like him? I sound just like him? Yeah, that's a good impression. I don't need the gospel. I got pecs. Sorry. Just kidding, McCoy. Call you Mickey C. All right. Do you imagine if I said this to him? If I said, McCoy, do you see that distance? That's kind of like my brain and your brain. That's a horrible insult, but if it comes from the Lord, we think, that's beautiful. But look at this verse again. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways than your ways. What's he saying? You guys, he couldn't even come up with a distance on the earth. He could have been like, do you see the top of the mountains? To you? He's like, that's too short. How about from you all the way around the earth? No, still too short. You to the moon? Still too short. Let's go stars. Do you see you and the stars? That's my brain. That's your brain. Translate it into 2018 language. What's he saying? I am so smart. And you are so not. I am so smart. I know more than you. I see more than you. I understand more than you. In fact, I'm going to show you a way that God taught me this. Okay? This is kind of a dumb story, but go with me on. I'm going to preface it. The scriptures say that God speaks to man in his own language, right? I don't think that just means English, Chinese, Japanese. That also means the way we think, right? So God spoke to me through my own language once. In about the mid-2000s, like 2005, 2006, there was this new thing that had come out called TiVo. TiVo meant you could record live TV and fast forward it. Who's used it before? Who's used this? So you born in the 2000s, you don't understand. Those of us born in the 1900s, let me just explain to you how primitive TV was, okay? When we wanted to see our favorite show, guess how long we waited between episodes? 1 week. Some of you are like, oh, that's awful. It is. How long do you wait between episodes? 20 seconds. 20 seconds. And for some of you, it's too long. You have to skip ahead. You're like, oh, start now. How many of you watched a whole season in one day? Do you know what we would have given to do that? By the way, when your favorite show came on once a week, guess what they did every 11 minutes or 12 minutes? 3 minutes of commercials. Yeah, some of you are like, even in the best parts, you guys remember? Those of you who are old, do you remember this? They'd get to the best part and then commercial. We had it timed. We were totally fine with it. Right? We're like, we know exactly how long we have to go to the room, get some more food, come back, sit down, 3 minutes, exactly. Here we go. We're ready to go again. You don't understand what trials are. All right? We are the handcart company of television. Now, we went through great difficulty. Okay. So this new thing came out called TiVo. You with me? And we're going to watch the Jazz game. This is back when the Jazz were good. And, sorry, we're getting better now. We went through a little 20-year slump. Okay, so we were in the playoffs. We're in the playoffs, and we were playing the Warriors, back when the Warriors were beatable. And does anybody get really into watching sports on television? Please tell me someone else like yells at the TV, please. Does anybody else grab the person next to them and shake them? Did anybody do this? Okay. Anybody jump on the couch? Okay, that's me. I get kind of excited watching television. So we're watching the game. It was the third quarter. Sorry. The Jazz were down by 11. And I knew that if they lost, they weren't going to play anymore. It's okay, sorry. Okay, so I got to explain. I was at my buddy Lynn's house, okay? So Lynn and Haley are our friends, and we were over at their house watching the game. And he has TiVo. Okay, So it goes to commercial. Well, before that, Jazz are down by 11, and Lynn says, I need more popcorn. The guy eats so much popcorn, it's insane. So he goes to get more popcorn. It goes to commercial. His wife, Haley, says, we have TiVo now. So she picks up the remote, and instead of hitting fast forward, she hits the live TV button, and it goes, and the game had just ended. In that very second she hit that button, the game was over, and the Jazz were in the middle of the court. They were hugging each other, jumping up and down, and she's like, oh, no, 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 and she went back. And she said, you did not see that. And I said, yeah, I did. And she said, don't tell Lynn. And I was like, don't tell. She's like, don't tell him how it ends. He doesn't know how it ends. I was like, okay. So Haley and my wife, Sarah, they left. They're like, we know how it ends. So they left. Lynn comes back in. He's got his popcorn, 20th bowl. And he said, where'd the girls go? They left. He's like, oh, they think it's over? I was like, sort of. How many of you thought bet him? How many of you thought bet him? Go ahead, raise your hand if you thought in your head, you evil souls. I thought it too, but he's my bishop. All right, so, you imagine, are you honest in your dealings with your phone? Everyone but you. Okay. So, he looks at me and he said, well, who do you think's going to win? And I was like, I got a good feeling. So, you got a good feeling? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I just think they're going to come. I just think the best is yet to come. He's like, whatever. So we fast forward the commercials and boom, we start the game again. He looks over at me. Oh, the Jazz went down. They went down by 13. So they're down by 11. They went down by 13. He looks at me, calm as a summer's day. He's like, are you okay? I'm like, mm-hmm. In fact, when the Warriors fans were cheering on TV, guess what I was saying in my head? You're going to lose. I've seen it. And when the Jazz, they went down by 13, they got so depressed. They went over to the bench, they had a timeout, they looked so depressed like it was over. What was I saying in my head? Oh, you just wait. You're going to win. I've seen it. And you guys, sure enough, just as I had prophesied. They hit 3 threes, they tied it up, all of a sudden they come back and boom, they win by 8 and the game's over. Lynn looks at me like, and I said, when you got a good feeling. Right? No, I told him what happened and we laughed about it and he said, I'm amazed you were able to keep it a secret, right? Now, I'm on my way home, I'm walking home, and all of a sudden something occurs to me. Now, this is the part where you're going to laugh at me because I learned a spiritual lesson through this. But God speaks to man in his own language, right? Speaks to you through Pinterest. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does. Speaks to you through weightlifting, right? Mickey C. He speaks to you through sports. Who's had God speak to them through their music? Through their music. Nobody here? Who's had God speak to them through their athletics? Learn lessons from athletics, right? God speaks to man in his own language. Men and women in their own language. So this is what I learned. As I'm walking home, I said, in some small, weird way, that's got to be how God feels when we are so discouraged and we think things are over and done and awful. And he's saying, no, they're not. In fact, I'm going to blow your mind here for a second. You ready? According to the scriptures, God says, I've seen the end and the beginning. He says in section 130 of the Doctrine and Covenants, past, present, and future, they're all the same to me. I see them all at the same time. I know some of you are like, ouch, that hurts my brain. Yeah. Think about it. God says, I see your past, present, and future all at the same time. So when you're struggling through something, yes, he sees you struggling, but he also sees you when? Later, when you're okay. Have you ever noticed that you don't get stress back from heaven? Anyone ever noticed that? You don't kneel down like, Heavenly Father, I don't know how this is going to work out. And he's not like, us neither. We've run the numbers. We have no idea how you're going to pull this off. No, you never get that back. What do you get back? Always, it's okay. You got this. Peace. Right? It's not like Peter and Jesus are walking on the water and Peter sees the wave and he's like, Jesus. And Jesus is like, go no, run, Peter. Right? That doesn't happen. What do they always get back from Jesus? Peace, calm, it's okay, it's fine. Why? Because he's seen the end. In fact, some of you adults remember this. Do you remember when President Hinckley was alive that he used to get interviewed for 60 minutes? And Mike Wallace was this really famous journalist, and he just loved being with President Hinckley. And one day, as they were going in an interview, he asked President Monson, he said, with all that man has to deal with, President Hinckley, with all that man has to deal with, how is he so optimistic? And it said, President Monson looked at him and winked and said, well, I think he knows how it all works out. This idea of it's okay because the Lord has seen the future and he's seen you happy. He's seen you up ahead. It's so much better when it comes from somebody who knows more than me. Do you know who Henry Eyring Sr. is? You ever heard that? Guess who his son is? You're right, Russell M. Nelson. Just kidding. Henry Eyring Sr.'s son is the one we know, Henry B. Eyring. Did you know that Henry Eyring Sr. was a world-famous chemist? In fact, he should have won the Nobel Prize, but he didn't. And a lot of people think, you want to know why they think he didn't win it? He was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they felt like it would diminish the prize. Now, when you're one of the smartest people in the world, you think you might get a little arrogant? You think you might know more than most people? You might look at other people and go, I pity you. You and your small brain. But listen to his humility. He's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. One of the smartest people on the planet. And he says, our understanding, great as it sometimes seems, can be nothing but the wide-eyed wonder of a child when measured against omniscience. He said this too. Listen to this, you guys. He said, when I go to my lab at the University of Utah, he said, I bet God pats me on the head and says, oh, it's so cute that you try. Look at you and your cute little chemistry set. I made chemistry, right? If you can have that kind of humility, it's going to be part of being softened. Doctrine and Covenants 58, the saints thought they'd move to Missouri and everything would work out. Who's ever had their plan? I'm going to do this and everything will work out. Who's ever made plans for God? Right? God, you don't have to give me your plans because I've already made them. This is how it's going to go down and it'll work out perfectly. And sometimes God goes, that's cute. Doctrine and Covenants 58, they thought they'd move into Missouri, Jesus would come. That's how it was going to work. God says, Doctrine and Covenants 58:3, you cannot behold with your natural eyes. I think he might want to say your human, puny eyes. You cannot behold with your natural eyes for the present time the design of your God, concerning the things which shall come hereafter and the glory which follows after much tribulation. Now, you wouldn't show up in your pioneer clothes and be like, as they're being driven out of Missouri, you know, this really is a blessing. You wouldn't do that. But they have to understand that. That's the way it is. Listen to people who have gone through great difficulties. You know who Helen Keller is? Helen Keller was both blind and deaf. Imagine that. She then has a nurse who teaches her to read and write. She becomes a prolific author. She said this. Now, if I said this, it wouldn't matter. But listen to this woman who's been through more difficulty than I can possibly imagine. Character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved. You guys ever seen the Provo Tabernacle? The Provo Tabernacle served as a meeting house for the church for 124 years. And then in December of 2010, what happened? It burned. A fire gutted the building. If you were to give this building feelings, what would it say? First of all, ouch. Second, do you think it would say something like this? At least if it was me, I would say something like this. After all I've done, after how hard I've tried to be good, why is this happening to me? You don't love me, or you don't appreciate me. I don't even know if you're there. But you know what God had in store, right? It had something entirely different in store. Do you think that building knew on the day it burned down what God had in store for it? No. And I'm going to say in the same vein, you have no idea what God has in store for you. You cannot see it, but He can. He can see it. And it's bigger than just this life. Listen to this. The future duties given to some of us in the worlds to come by an omniscient God will require of us an earned sense of esteem as well as proof of our competency. Elder Neil A. Maxwell, listen to this second paragraph. Thus, the tests given to us here are given not because God is in doubt as to the outcome. He's not just testing you, but because we need to grow in order to be able to serve with full effectiveness, not just in this life, but in the eternities to come. Your trials here are not just preparing you for your future adulthood, being a grandparent or a great-grandparent. They're preparing you to become like God. That's why God says, I can give you beauty for ashes, according to Isaiah 61. Everything can be taken from a man. Do you know who Viktor Frankl is? Viktor Frankl lived in a concentration camp where his family died. He says everything can be taken but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose your own. So I thought it might be nice, as I finish up here, to show you people who have chosen their own way. The first one is my friend Maddie. Now, I have to give you a little background. I got a call from EFY about 4 months ago, and my friend JD Hux, who runs EFY, said, "Hank, will you do me a favor?" I said, "Absolutely, JD." He said, "I need you to go to Florida." I was like, "That's a big favor." He said, "Well, here's the deal." He said, "You know about the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in February?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw that on the news." He said, "The stake of the church that feeds that school is having youth conference in 2 weeks. There was a young lady there named Elena Petty who was killed at school. She was signed up to go to EFY. And I'm hoping that you'll go there." The stake president asked for you specifically, which I was very honored by, but also terrified. I said, I can do it. So I flew down there. I didn't know what to do. When I got there, there was a girl with her arm in a sling. Her name's Maddie. She bore her testimony at the youth conference testimony meeting, and she said the closing prayer to my fireside. And of course, I wanted to say thank you, so I went up to her and I said, "Hey, thanks for saying, the closing prayer." And I said, "What happened to your arm?" And she said, "Oh, I was shot 5 times at school." And I just was not expecting that. I said, "Oh, you got shot at school?" She said, "Yeah, 5 times." She said, "Do you want to see I just got my staples out. You want to see?" And she pulled off the sling on her arm, and there was a massive gash on her arm where the exit wound, where the bullet she was running away, and the bullet had gone in the back of her arm and come out the front and put a huge gash in her arm. And I was just kind of standing there shocked. Here I am talking to this girl. She was shot 5 times, not just 2 months ago, at school. And I said, "How are you doing this?" And she said, "Doing what?" I said, "How are you still here and smiling and moving around?" She's like, "I don't know. It's just what I do." She said, "In fact, I think I'm going to win 2 truths and a lie for the rest of my life." I'm like, "What?" She said, "Think about it. When you have to play that game, 2 truths and a lie, and people have to guess the one lie, you tell them 3 things, they have to guess the one lie. I know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say I was shot 5 times in one day. I've met the President of the United States, and I've never had a cavity." Which one's the lie? I said, "Maddie, your attitude's incredible. I want you to post on my Instagram," right? That's how you compliment people these days. So I took this picture with Maddie and her brother, John. And this is what she said. Can you see it? It's on the top right-hand side, second paragraph. She said, quote, "I'm so blessed." What? She says, "I'm so blessed to have all this love from everybody. I just want to say I love you all. God has a plan for each and every one of you. What you're going through has a purpose. It's going to be hard. Life's not perfect. But all you have to do is keep your Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ in mind. Keep going, because trust me, He won't let you down." I went back into the chapel to get my computer. And in the chapel was a husband and wife. Their son was at youth conference, and they wanted to support him there at the testimony meeting. They invited all the parents to the testimony meeting in the fireside. I knew immediately who they were when I saw them. I said, "Hello, Sister Petty." She said, "Hello, Brother Smith." And she looked, as you could imagine, that she looked like tragedy has torn through her life. She handed me this bracelet. I keep it on. It says, "Alina Joanne Petty, always in our hearts." Their little girl was 14 years old, went to school on Valentine's Day, and didn't come home. I have a 14-year-old daughter. I keep this on my wrist to remind me of what faith looks like. There's a woman in Grantsville, Utah, who kissed her husband Leon goodbye as he went to work. It was the last time she would ever see him alive. On his way to work, there was a collision with a young man, 20 years old, who was on his way to his first job, was trying to pass a slower vehicle and hit Leon Yates head on, killing both of them. Leon's wife, Sister Yates, and the parents of the son of the young man met together. Sister Yates says, I was shocked. I was so centered on my own grief and pain. I had not even thought about this young man and his family. I suddenly realized that there was a mother who was in as much pain or even more pain than I was. Each October, Sister Yates and Sister Wilmore go to the temple together and offer thanks for the atonement of Jesus Christ. You now know what faith looks like. This is my friend Kristen Watabe. She says, quote, of all the humans in the entire world, my dad was the one who understood me the most. He knew when I was sad and when I was happy. Most of the time he knew when I was happy or sad before I knew that I was happy or sad. He understood me in a way that only a dad can. If you know me, you know that I'm Daddy's little princess. My dad would do anything for me. When something was on my mind, he would walk with me around the neighborhood past midnight until I got all my thoughts out. A lot of times, even when he had already gotten home late from working and when he had to get up early the next day. It was a tragic day in their ward. Kristen's dad was serving as bishop, and on a rappelling trip with the priest, he fell. Was killed instantly. Kristen's in my class at BYU. I asked her, how are you doing this? Think of your dad. Think of your mom, your dad, and what it would feel like to have them taken from you. She said, well, everything that has happened strengthens my resolve to live as Christ lived. Isn't that amazing? That's what being softened looks like. To use his all-encompassing atonement to help others find the healing and peace that can come from developing a personal relationship with him. God has a plan for everyone. I know that both my heavenly Father and my earthly Father are watching over me now. God surrounded me with people that love me and are willing to help me. My dad was my best friend. He was my biggest cheerleader. He always believed in me. He was my sushi eating buddy. He was my guardian. And now he's my angel. How about you dads in the audience? You want to hear a story that will rip your heart out? You're like, yeah, Brother Smith, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Gail Clegg in General Conference told the story of her ancestor, Henry Clegg Jr., who met the missionaries in Preston, England, and immigrated to Utah with his wife, Hannah, and their 2 young boys. He left his older parents, knowing he would probably never see them again. While crossing the plains, his wife, Hannah, contracted cholera and died. She was laid to rest in an unmarked grave. The company then moved on, and at 6 p.m, his youngest son died. Henry retraced his steps back to his wife's grave, placed his young son in his wife's arms, reburied the 2 of them together, and then returned to the wagon train, now 5 miles away. When he finally reached Utah, he kept the faith. Gail Clegg, in General Conference, she says, I was struck with the words he used when he started writing in his journal again. Still moving. Ugh. I would love to say I'm like them. Wouldn't you love to say that? Wouldn't you love to say I'm made of that? Anybody here feel like they are? I'm made of that stuff. You ever heard the name Stillman Pond? Stillman Pond went into winter quarters with his wife and his 8 children. He left Winter Quarters, Nebraska, alone. He buried every one of them. I was standing at the Winter Quarters marker, the trail center there in Winter Quarters, Nebraska, and my buddy Alex Baugh came up to me. He's a church historian, one of the greatest guys I know. He put his arm around me and he's crying and he said, Hank, I'm faithful, but I don't think I'll ever be Stillman Pond. Can I share with you one last story? My friend John Parker told me this story, and for some reason I've always remembered it, and I thought it would be a good example of softening during trials. Bruce Parker was the seminary teacher in Rexburg, Idaho, Madison High School, for a long, long time. It got to the point where kids would come in and say, you taught my mom. You taught my dad. Do you have any seminary teachers here that have been here forever? That's how Brother Parker was. He had 10, 11 children, lots of kids, and they were good citizens, good people, and everybody in the community knew them. His daughter Michelle, 17 years old, great girl, trying her best to get good grades. She and her best friend went to a care center one Sunday to sing at a care center, singing at a sacrament meeting. And on their way home, they were both killed in a car accident. She was late for family pictures. And John told me, he said, she's never late. I knew something was wrong. He said the funeral, the whole town came to the funeral. And there's my dad and my mom on the second row. And he said, they're just devastated, right? I know your parents sometimes don't act like they adore you, but they do. And to have this girl's life taken, because all we want grandkids, right? We want grandkids, and you're supposed to go on and be happy and go live your life and get old, and we're going to watch that happen and love it. And now it was gone. It was over for her, at least for the time being. And he was devastated. He said, but what happened next changed my life. My father, in this church full of people where he could have been focused on himself, stood up, came up to the front, didn't speak for long. But he said he knew he had a lot of students and former students in the audience. And he wanted to quote them one verse. It was Job 13:15. John told me my dad said, quote, though he slay me, though God slay me, yet will I trust him. And he sat down. If you can get to that point, my friends, though he slay me, though he rips my heart out, though I know he could fix this, but he didn't, I will trust him. Do you remember our title for tonight? Trial, blessing, or both. I was thinking about this title, and I like the idea that your greatest trials can become your greatest blessings, but I want to turn it around a little bit, and I want to share with you this. James Talmage wrote about the Garden of Gethsemane. I'm going to ask you a question before I read this. Was Christ's atonement a trial or a blessing? It's what? It's both. Now, I know some of you are like, I just don't understand his suffering. Brother Smith, I just don't get it. That's okay. You'll never get it. Why? It's outside of our scope of understanding. I can understand some of the suffering we've been talking about tonight. I can understand some of that. This, you'll never understand. It is outside your scope of understanding to try to comprehend the suffering that the Savior went through. That's why it's so difficult. You look at it and go, I know it's important, I know it matters, but I can't understand it. And that's okay. We should keep trying to understand it, but we'll never get there. Elder Talmage, a brilliant apostle, he did a pretty good job of describing it. He said, quote, Christ's agony in the garden is unfathomable by the finite mind, both as to intensity and cause. It wasn't just physical pain. It wasn't just mental anguish alone that caused him to suffer such torture as to produce an extrusion of blood from every pore, but it was a spiritual agony. Only God was capable of experiencing. No other man or woman, however great their powers of physical or mental endurance, could have suffered so. For their human organism, their body, would have succumbed, and syncope would have produced unconsciousness and welcome oblivion. Let me translate that for you. He said, if you try what the Savior did in the Garden of Gethsemane, what would happen? You would die. Not only you would die, you would welcome death. But he says, in some manner, actual and terribly real, though to man incomprehensible, the Savior took upon himself the burdens of the sins of mankind from Adam to the end of the world. Elder Holland says, of course it's not easy. Of course life is not easy. Salvation was never easy. This is the truth. Jesus is the great eternal head. How can we believe it would be easy for us when it was never easy for him? If he can come forward and kneel down, fall on his face, bleed from every pore, cry out, Abba, Father, then little wonder that salvation is not whimsical or easy. If you ever wonder if there isn't an easier way, you should remember you are not the first one to ask that. Someone a lot greater and a lot grander asked a long time ago if there wasn't an easier way. Now, those of you who are suffering, and I know some of you aren't, and I'm very happy for you, and keep on going. But those of you who are suffering, I don't know what to tell you. I wish there was a magic verse that took away depression. I wish there was a magic story that took away anxiety from you. It hurts my heart to see. I hate seeing anyone suffer, but young people, teenagers, It just breaks my heart. I just love them. I love them. They're non-fully developed brains. I just love them. I don't know how to fix it. I wish I could. I wish I could fix it for you. And I know your parents want to fix it for you. And I know your church leaders want to fix it for you. But the only thing we can tell you is this. Somewhere in this atonement is your answer. We can't provide it for you. We're in the same boat as you. We cannot provide it for you. As much as your parents love you, they cannot provide the healing you need. They cannot provide the answers. Somewhere in that atonement, and I don't know where because I don't understand it, but somewhere in that atonement is your answer, your healing, your help. It's not going to be found on YouTube, I promise. It's not going to be found on Google. If any of you lack information, let him ask of Google. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. President Monson said this. He can say it better than I can. We need to finish up. Only the Master knows the depths of our trials. I know that you put on a happy face here, you little punks. You put on a happy face here and you're like, I'm good, I'm fine. And you're not fine. You're hurting. They do this. Mom and dad, they are actors and actresses. They've been taught they just need to smile and wave. Smile and wave, right? Their teachers say, how are you? Guess what they say? Great. Their parents say, how are things? They say, I'm fine. And then they get in their room on their own and they're not okay. They're not fine. I do a lot of anti-bullying assemblies, and so I read a lot of, which is really sad to do, but I read a lot of teen suicide stories. And the most common phrase I read in those stories from parents and friends is, we had no idea she was hurting that much. We had no idea he was in that much pain and suffering. I wish I could fix it. Only the Master knows the depths of your trials, your pain, and your suffering. He alone offers eternal peace in the middle of this, all this adversity. Whether it's the best of times or the worst of times, he is with us. He has promised that this will never change. And I will add one last sentence. He always keeps his promises. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
We hope you have enjoyed the presentation. Our authors and artists enjoy hearing from their listeners. You can write to them, care of Covenant Communications, P.O. Box 416, American Fork, Utah 84003, or by email at info@covenant-lds.com. To receive additional information on Covenant products, visit our website at www.covenant-lds.com.